Plague Tale: Innocence was a game that truly surprised me. From a studio like Asobo, who had done nothing of the sort. This third-person stealth, narrative adventure game came out of nowhere and was deeply impressive. Innocence, to this day, stands as a magnificently directed experience, where every moment is important to the game and the story. It introduced us to interesting mechanics, largely based on stealth and puzzles to avoid detection by guards and eaten by rats. While I certainly found the gameplay and world to be interesting, the part that made the first game such a memorable experience was the characters, Amicia and Hugo. Their journey of survival in the first game, Amicia's brutal coming-of-age story in that game, having to protect herself and her brother while her life is turned upside down and the world around them appears to be ending. As soon as Requiem was announced, I knew that this would be a day one for me. I desperately wanted to see how this story would continue, but also how Asobo, making a AA out-of-nowhere experience, could now expand on the gameplay aspects with a higher budget and a recognisable brand. And Requiem does just that. It's a true step forward in the narrative and gameplay, continuing what made the first game so captivating by doing more. This game is almost twice as long, and scenarios are larger, more complex, with more options to them. But underneath all that is a narrative, a continuation of these characters that took it in a direction I didn't believe it would go. The first major and notable aspect and upgrade to this sequel in the gameplay aspect is that of locations. The first game gave us lots of narrow streets, compact, claustrophobic locations that were aggressively linear. Whereas, in this game, locations are significantly wider and more varied. Not only are there sections in this game that in some cases are relatively open to find yourself in, such as the main section on the island, even cities and towns. The streets are wider, there are side streets to explore and open areas such as markets. There is also just so much more of this game. The first game had 17 chapters, and as does this. The difference here is, the chapters in this game are almost twice as long, leading to a much longer game, with almost all gameplay aspects giving more options for versatility. Even with this game being significantly bigger, it's still very linear, concise and to the point, with the focus being absolutely on the narrative and journey of these siblings, but in particularly Amicia. There is some side content in this game, but it isn't much. While it's technically off the beaten path, it really kinda only barely is. The game presents hardly any filler in these aspects. Combat was perhaps the weakest part of the first game. Not because it wasn't good, but just because it wasn't the focus. There was still a bit of a sting though, watching Amicia just pass up picking up swords, daggers, axes or anything else that could help her, instead of relying mostly on her sling. But also, that's the point. She's a teenage girl using the tools she can. The sling is still the main weapon Amicia has here. Throwing rocks are great for headshotting enemies without helmets, but other than that, alchemy is our friend in these situations. There are 4 main ways to manipulate Amicia's weapons with alchemy. First is Ignifier, useful for burning enemies, grass, lighting torches on fire, and using light to avoid rats. The second is Extinguish, which can be used to stun enemies or extinguish their torches, usually unleashing a horde of waiting rats upon them. Tar is used to maintain flames, such as a pot with tar will create an air of effect where the fire will burn longer and at a much greater range. The last, Odorous, can be slung to attract rats to a specific location for a short time. These mechanics are the core that all systems are built on: puzzles, stealth, and combat. And in combat, they offer really unique interaction. Where in most games, we're used to playing badasses that cut through common guards like cannon fodder, here it's the opposite. Amicia is a young teenage girl, unable to really even swing a sword, so these full-grown men do pose a real threat to her, and her only hope, and yours the player, is the ability to be creative with the tools at her disposal. It's an extremely refreshing perspective from a genre such as this, and at times it even feels like this really unique, historical third-person shooter, trying to trick and manipulate enemies into horde of rats or into fire, rather than more simple combat scenarios. Of course, Amicia's arsenal gets a substantial upgrades here, and that's with the crossbow. The crossbow allows more direct attacks by Amicia, shooting enemies in the body with bolts, and shooting heavily armoured enemies on their straps will make them more vulnerable. The crossbow is a weapon about timing, because well, bolts can be rare to find, and Amicia can't carry all that many, meaning when to use the crossbow is very important, as it doesn't just suddenly make combat a walk in the park, and still requires the player to use all elements in Amicia's arsenal. The one gripe I had was towards the later section of the game, there were various combat arenas in which enemies do just keep coming and Amicia has to take them out with the resources needed, constantly respawning, and these resources basically telling you how to take down these enemies. I did like this narratively though, as it built up through Amicia's rage and desperation, even if in a gameplay sense it wasn't as interesting. Stealth returns in a similar way in this game. Avoiding enemies and guards is almost always the better option than fighting them, which sticks to the tone and narrative of the game, being kids trying to avoid a fight and instead seeking safety and answers. Only brought to violence when necessary or towards the end when rageful. Stealth works by largely staying out of sight, hiding behind walls and in grass. Distracting guards comes into play here, throwing rocks and pots which will often make guards turn to certain areas, allowing Amicia and whoever she's with to slip past. A new mechanic is with Sophia, who uses reflections in one section to light grass on fire and distract these guards. Stealth in this game isn't complicated, and it's largely the exact same as the first game. The major changes in this are the scenarios, as the arenas for these stealth sections are usually much larger and more varied than the first game, having multiple sections with multiple enemies to move past, and oftentimes having things in the way such as rats. Amicia's tools come into play here too, lighting fires with ignifier or extinguishing them, attracting rats with odorous to move between Amicia and these guards. The tools provide a lot of options for creativity and how the player wants to address each stealth situation differently, and that was personally my favourite part of the gameplay loop, getting to a new arena, analysing the situation and resources Amicia had, and going from there. The first game evolved you from fearing the rats to learning how to use them, by extinguishing guards' lights, and finally, at the end when Hugo learned how to control them. We don't go through that journey again, but the same elements are still here. A new mechanic particularly is Hugo controlling the swarm of rats, which was only used very lightly and linearly in the first game, whereas in this it's a constant tool to be used as long as Hugo and the rats are present. In Innocence, the world was very dark and bleak. I remember so vividly the horrors that game presented, and how truly terrible this world felt. Requiem, on the other hand, goes for a different approach. With the events of Guyane behind them, our protagonists, the start of the game, are met by beauty. The beautiful green and colourful fields, childlike games of hide and seek, beautiful rivers and ruins, only to be quickly contrasted by the horror of the people there. The slaughter of the beekeepers in the first chapter, and the ultimate firestorm leading their run. This is a notion that is repeated throughout the game, showing the true beauty of this world and how that is corrupted by the people there, but also by Hugo's presence. The first city we arrive to, we spend the first part admiring it with Hugo, the people, the markets, the music, only to enter the arena and beyond to see the true horrors of the plague and the macula have reached here too. Again, this is repeated with Lacuna, the main island a large portion of the game takes place. The people here are friendly, it's sunny, clean and colourful, before it's absolutely, completely destroyed and decimated by the rats. While Innocence was a great looking game graphically, I would argue that there wasn't much beauty, and the contrast here in Requiem helps so much to sell us on this curse. The juxtaposition of these places before and after Hugo and the macula arrives reinforces and emphasizes so much why this world is worth fighting for, and the true horrors this curse and this plague has brought. Side content in this game largely comes in the form of collectibles. Hugo likes to collect flowers and feathers, so when Amicia spots certain kinds, she will retrieve them for him, as well as there are others that revolve around finding things in the world that inform more about the character. These are optional interactions between the characters to build more about their personalities, and they can even be connected. For an example, early in Lacuna, Hugo attempts to pet a goat that yells at him, and he gets scared by it. Later on, Amicia, Sophia and Hugo can help save a goat that is trapped, and help Hugo overcome this fear. It's little things like this, while completely optional, make these characters feel more real and the player connected to them. Requiem also does some interesting things in terms of upgrades. The first part is very straightforward. There are crafting tables, and Amicia can upgrade things like her sling or crossbow at them, as long as she has the appropriate materials. The second is more interesting, where it works like a skill tree that you involuntarily upgrade, and there are 3 paths to this. Prudence, which is stealth, aggressive, which is self-explanatory, and opportunism, which is based largely around alchemy. And instead of picking these upgrades, such as quieter footsteps, because you want to be more stealthy, the game automatically upgrades you depending on how you play the game. So if you tend to be more aggressive, the game is going to reward you with more abilities for that playstyle. Ultimately, I'm conflicted on this setup. I think rewarding players for how they want to play a game is great, But there's a little too much autopilot here, and I believe it takes away from the agency of the player deciding how to. This game really hinges on its narrative, and it truly evolves the story from Innocence in a few key ways. After the events of Innocence, Beatrice, Lucas, Amicia and Hugo are all travelling seeking answers to the Prima Macula with Hugo from the alchemists of the Order. They go to find one, Verdun, in the city of Provence. We find the plague has followed them to the city and they must escape it, but not before we find out Verdun has pretty much said Hugo is going to die and he needs to be taken to the Order as his condition is dangerous. While Beatrice accepts this, being a part of the Order herself, Amicia certainly doesn't. She is going to let Hugo die, and there is hope. Hugo has a dream of an island with a bird and a pool of water that will cure him. So Amicia and Hugo ditch Beatrice and Lucas to find the island by themselves. Amicia desperately hoping this will save her brother. And that's really what this story is all about. The desperation of Amicia to save Hugo, to cure him above all odds. Before making it to the island of Lacuna, we meet two other main characters. Arno, the Knight, which is hunting down Amicia due to her killing of guards in the city. Whereas in the first game, Hugo and Amicia were being chased by the Inquisition due to Hugo having the macula, here they are being chased because of Amicia and her actions. Arno injures Amicia, but eventually ends up helping them both and becoming quite fond of Hugo. He originally wants to use Hugo's powers to kill the Count, which he has a grievance with, but eventually falls in line after spending time and getting to know Hugo, likewise wanting to find a way to save him. The other is Arno's friend Sophia, who they originally find to make use of her ship to sail to Lacuna. Sophia accompanies Amicia and Hugo on their journey throughout Lacuna. This journey involves finding Roman ruins, leading to the discovery that this isn't the first plague caused by the macula, and that another child or carrier, Basilius, and another protector called Aelia once went through a journey similar to Hugo and Amicia, ultimately culminating with Basilius being locked up and experimented on in Lacuna, with Aelia failing to rescue him. This is where Hugo's visions of Lacuna come from, Basilius wanting to communicate with Hugo and bring him to the island for answers through the visions. Lacuna also has the Count present, which has used this history of the ruins of the island to create a cult to feed his wife Emily's fascination that she is the chosen mother of this child of the carrier, in which results in them killing Beatrice, Hugo's real mother. This traumatic event for Hugo makes the macula's power within him grow, causing complete devastation of the island and the death of Emily, which drives the Count mad with grief. Hugo this whole time is continuously being traumatized by the events taking place. The knowledge of what's happened to Basilius, and everywhere he goes turned into a dystopian horror, is causing a lot of distress for Hugo, and he just wants it all to stop. He wants the dying to stop, the rats to stop. He just wants to be a normal kid. Amicia is forcing Hugo, though she desperately is trying to find a cure for him, and at a certain point you have to ask, is it for him or for herself? Sailing to the mainland, the Count catches up with the group and appears to kill Amicia. This sends Hugo into a rage, but is knocked out and kidnapped by the Count, taken to the city of Marseille. Upon reaching the city, Arno fights the Count, and the Count explains he's going to use Hugo's rat powers for conquer. Well, that doesn't last, as Arno sacrificed himself for Amicia to kill the Count. But Hugo wakes up in Marseille, believing Amicia is dead, his mother is dead, and that nearly everyone he's ever cared about is dead, and completely loses control to the macula. Rats pour out of the city, completely destroying it, as Amicia, Lucas, and Sophia make their way to him. The end to this story provides such a powerful blending of narrative and gameplay. All the intrinsic designs made by the game, avoiding the rats, following the birds, using light to help navigate, is subverted here. Amicia, instead to find Hugo, needs to do everything the opposite of what she has been the whole game. She surrenders to the darkness, to the rats, and once she does, she finds Hugo. He accepts and tells her what must be done. Hugo is ultimately lost to the macula, and the only way to stop the devastation is through his own death. Throughout the game, Amicia, Hugo, and the other characters have a game. Hugo is the king, everyone accompanying them is his servants. Arno is his knight, Sophia is his smuggler, and so on. Well, at the end we find King Hugo on his throne with his servant of army of rats. The cruel thing about this is Amicia is the one that has to stop it. She has to step up and be the hero in this awful situation, the one to slay her own brother for the good of the world, which she reluctantly does, or at least in my playthrough. If you refuse to do it, eventually Lucas will instead, but I don't really like this decision narratively. It's important it must be Amicia. A lot of arguments are that this ending makes both this and the first game pointless, but I feel that misses the entire point. The point of these games weren't that Hugo was cursed and needed to be cured, it was how Missy had to step up and be the ultimate hero, to sacrifice what she cared about most, the lengths that she went to avoid having to, and the ultimate somber reality that this journey caused. It's not a happy story, and hell, I certainly didn't feel happy or have fun with the ending, but I understood it and why it had to be done, and the build-up it had. Missy had to be the hero Joel from The Last of Us couldn't be. She had to put everyone else, the world above her and Hugo, and what she cared about most, and it broke her. And well, it damn near broke me. I've barely ever had such a visceral reaction to events in a game, and as the credits roll, and the sun, which had been engulfed earlier by the macula, began to appear over the horizon again, I just sat there stunned. Games don't usually affect me to this level, and going into Requiem, I never expected this outcome. From the moment the vision appeared at the start of the game, I expected Hugo to somehow, some way, come out of this. After 2 full games and seeing the innocence of Hugo, the childlike wonder, and the joy that makes you appreciate all the small things about this world and just living in it, this game made me have such an emotional reaction, which is the purpose of art and story. And while certainly the gameplay isn't as refined, and there are definitely some issues such as 30 FPS on console, the narrative truly affected me. I cared so much about these fictional characters of Hugo and Amicia, and really felt the pain each went through. We get a little bit more though. An epilogue a year later. Lucas is studying alchemy further, Amicia has been living in the mountains, and is about to set off on a quest with Sophia to set up and help the next generation affected by the macula. The next carrier and protector, hoping their outcome will be better than hers and Hugo's, and Basilius's and Elia's. We also see a grave or shrine to Hugo, and Amicia still deeply affected by everything that's happened to them. We also get a tease of a baby born in modern day with an unmistakable mark of the macula. Could this be sequel bait, or just an Easter egg? I guess we'll have to wait and see. On the term of continuing this franchise, I'm personally mixed. I think what made these 2 games so special was Hugo and Amicia, and if anything at most, I'd like to see maybe a short DLC about how Amicia attempts to move on with her life without Hugo and the macula. On the other hand, there is the perfect setup for exploring other disasters and plagues throughout history, and even potentially in modern times, uncovering the clues and things Amicia hid hundreds of years ago, in a similar way to games like Assassin's Creed or Horizon would have you uncover things about the ancient past. I think this all works narratively, but would be quite a jump in the gameplay department. As it stands, I would be more than happy for this to be the conclusion to this franchise. I ultimately feel like the story has been told. I want to see this team at Asobo move on to the next idea and the next gameplay, setting, and characters they can create. I firmly believe A Plague Tale Requiem is a narrative masterpiece. Rarely do games, or even media in general, make me feel as emotional as I did at the end of this game, and only something truly impactful like that deserves such a moniker. The way the game picks up from the first game and slowly but carefully brings our protagonists to the ending they both fear the most. The storytellers of this game have certainly earned my respect, and I'm excited to see what they do next. For the rest of this game, the gameplay feels evolved, but still in keeping with the foundations built by the first game, and all levels between stealth, combat, puzzles, locations, and characters all feel like a natural and purposeful step up from the predecessor, and it certainly, at least at this moment, is my personal game of the year. Thank you so much for watching this video. A Plague Tale Requiem was truly a special game where I feel like the narrative was really impactful to me personally. Let me know what your thoughts are on Plague Tale Requiem in the comments if you've played it, or if maybe this video has maybe convinced you to. If you like this video, please leave a like, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe, as I have plenty more on the way. Until next time, cheers and have a good one.